There are seasons of life where you stop checking in with yourself because simply making it through the day already feels like a full-time job. You wake up tired, even after sleeping. You answer messages while secretly hoping nobody asks too much from you. You move through routines automatically, but internally, you feel disconnected from yourself. And the strange part is that most people around you may never notice. From the outside, your life can still look normal. You still show up. You still handle responsibilities. You still say, "I'm fine," before anyone even finishes asking how you are. But inside, there's a quiet exhaustion that keeps growing. Not the kind that disappears after one good night of rest. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long without allowing yourself to stop. Sometimes it's emotional weight. Sometimes it's pressure. Sometimes it's disappointment after disappointment until your mind no longer knows how to fully relax. You become so focused on surviving that you forget you are a person, not a machine. And little by little, your inner world changes. Small things begin to feel heavier than they used to. Simple decisions become overwhelming. You stare at tasks for long periods before starting them. You lose energy for conversations you once enjoyed. Then the guilt begins. You tell yourself you should be stronger. You compare yourself to people who seem to handle life better. You wonder why basic things suddenly feel difficult for you. But what if the problem is not weakness? What if you've simply been carrying more than you admit to yourself? Many people become experts at enduring. They learn how to function while emotionally drained. They learn how to smile while feeling disconnected. They learn how to comfort everyone else while quietly neglecting themselves. After enough time, survival starts looking normal to you. You stop noticing how exhausted you really are because exhaustion becomes familiar. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And maybe part of that acceptance is finally admitting, I have been struggling longer than I realized. I have been harder on myself than I needed to be. I have been expecting endless strength from a tired person. There is pain in realizing how long you've ignored your own needs. But there is also relief. Because for the first time, you stop treating your exhaustion like a personal failure. You begin understanding that anyone carrying this much for this long would eventually feel overwhelmed. And maybe that changes the way you speak to yourself. Maybe instead of saying, "What's wrong with me?" you begin asking, "What have I been carrying alone?" That question changes something, because suddenly your sadness makes more sense. Your fatigue makes more sense. Even your emotional distance begins to make sense. You realize you were not failing at life. You were surviving it the best way you knew how. And survival deserves compassion too. Not only the polished version of you. Not only the productive version. Not only the version that has everything together. You deserve kindness even in the middle of your exhaustion. Especially there. Because sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who never struggle. Sometimes they are the ones who keep going while carrying pain nobody else can see. And if you are tired right now, deeply tired, there is a reason for that. You've been surviving longer than you realize. And you do not have to keep punishing yourself for being affected by it. Most people do not realize how cruel they have become toward themselves until they pay attention to their own thoughts for a full day. The way you talk to yourself after making a mistake. The way you judge yourself for feeling emotional. The way you become impatient with your own sadness, exhaustion, or confusion. Sometimes the harshest voice you hear is the one inside your own mind. And after hearing it long enough, you stop questioning it. You begin believing it is simply the truth. So when something goes wrong, your mind immediately says, "Of course you failed. You always mess things up. You should be handling this better." Even during moments when you are trying your best, there is still a part of you criticizing every step. You forget something small and suddenly feel ashamed. You struggle emotionally for a few days and convince yourself you are weak. You rest for one evening and feel guilty instead of relieved. Over time, this becomes automatic. You no longer notice how deeply unkind your inner voice has become because you have lived with it for so long. But that voice did not appear out of nowhere. The way people speak to themselves is often learned slowly over time. Sometimes it develops from constantly feeling pressured to succeed. Sometimes from growing up around criticism. Sometimes from environments where mistakes were treated like failures instead of part of being human. And eventually, you begin repeating those same patterns internally. You become your own harsh observer, your own impossible standard, your own source of pressure. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And maybe this is part of what he meant. Sometimes the voice inside your head is speaking from old wounds, old fears, and old expectations you never fully questioned. That voice may sound familiar because you have heard versions of it for years. The problem is that constant self-criticism slowly changes the way you experience life. You stop feeling safe making mistakes. You become afraid of disappointing people. You overthink simple interactions. You replay conversations at night, wondering if you sounded foolish or annoying. Even peaceful moments become difficult because your mind is always searching for what is wrong with you. And the exhausting part is that many people believe this harshness is necessary. They think, if I stop criticizing myself, I'll stop improving. If I'm not hard on myself, I'll become lazy. If I let myself off the hook, I'll fall behind. But fear is not the same thing as growth. Constant pressure does not create peace. It creates anxiety. It creates emotional exhaustion. It creates a life where you never feel fully accepted, even by yourself. Imagine speaking to someone you care about the same way you speak to yourself. Imagine telling them, "You're not doing enough. You should be better by now. Why can't you get your life together?" You would immediately recognize how painful that sounds. Yet many people live with that tone in their minds every single day. And after enough time, they begin carrying shame without even realizing it. Not because they are failing, but because they have forgotten how to speak to themselves with patience. Being kinder to yourself does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means understanding that you are a human being, not a project that deserves punishment every time something goes wrong. You are allowed to struggle without insulting yourself for it. You are allowed to learn without hating yourself during the process. You are allowed to be imperfect without treating yourself like a disappointment. Changing your inner voice takes time, especially if harshness has felt normal for most of your life. At first, compassion may even feel uncomfortable. You may not fully believe kinder thoughts when you say them. But slowly, something begins to change. You pause before attacking yourself. You notice the old patterns. You start questioning whether every cruel thought truly deserves your trust. And maybe one day, instead of immediately saying, "What is wrong with me?" you quietly ask, "What happened to me that made me speak to myself this way?" That question matters, because healing often begins there, not with perfection, not with becoming endlessly positive, but with recognizing that the voice in your head learned its tone somewhere, and realizing that means the tone can change too. One of the quietest forms of pain is pretending something did not hurt you as much as it actually did. You tell yourself, "It's not a big deal. I should be over this already. Other people go through worse." So instead of giving yourself compassion, you begin arguing with your own feelings. You try to convince yourself that your exhaustion is laziness, that your sadness is weakness, that your emotional reactions are somehow dramatic or unnecessary. But feelings do not disappear just because you judge them. They stay. They build quietly inside you. And eventually, they begin showing up in ways you cannot ignore. Sometimes it becomes constant tiredness. Sometimes irritation. Sometimes emotional numbness. Sometimes a strange heaviness you cannot fully explain. You may notice yourself pulling away from people. You stop answering messages as quickly. You avoid certain conversations because you no longer have the energy to explain how you feel. And part of you feels guilty for changing. But difficult experiences affect people. That is part of being human. Not everything painful leaves visible marks. Some experiences leave emotional ones. A harsh conversation can stay in your mind for weeks. A disappointment can quietly change the way you trust. Months of stress can slowly drain the joy out of ordinary life. And many people keep carrying these things while pretending they are completely fine. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But before people can grow, they often need permission to first admit, "Yes, this affected me." That honesty matters more than people realize, because healing cannot begin while you are still minimizing your own pain. There are people who spent years surviving emotionally difficult periods while telling themselves they had no right to feel overwhelmed. They kept functioning, kept working, kept taking care of responsibilities, but internally, they were exhausted. And the hardest part is that when someone becomes skilled at hiding their pain, even they begin forgetting how heavy things truly feel. They become disconnected from themselves. They laugh in conversations while secretly feeling empty. They say, "I'm okay," automatically. They continue helping others while quietly falling apart inside. After a while, emotional suppression starts feeling normal, but your mind and body still remember what you carry. That is why certain moments suddenly overwhelm you, why small things sometimes trigger deep emotions, why you feel exhausted even when you cannot explain exactly why. Your system has been holding more than you admit, and maybe you learned to dismiss your own feelings because you thought strength meant staying unaffected. But real strength is not emotional numbness. Real strength is being honest enough to acknowledge when something hurt. You are allowed to admit that certain experiences changed you. You are allowed to admit that some seasons of your life were heavier than you expected. You are allowed to say, "That was difficult for me," without guilt, without comparison, without needing permission from anyone else. Because pain is not a competition, and emotional struggles do not become invalid simply because someone else is suffering too. Your experiences matter because they happened to you. Sometimes people become harsh with themselves because they think acknowledging pain means becoming stuck in it. But there is a difference between living inside pain and recognizing its impact. Ignoring emotional wounds does not erase them. It only forces you to carry them silently. And silence can become exhausting, especially when you spend years pretending to be unaffected. Jung also wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Part of knowing yourself is recognizing what has genuinely hurt you instead of constantly trying to appear unaffected. Because when you finally stop denying your own emotional reality, something softens inside you. You begin speaking to yourself differently. Instead of saying, "I'm too sensitive," you begin saying, "I've been carrying a lot." Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you begin asking, "What have I been through?" And those questions create compassion, not self-pity, not excuses, compassion. The kind that allows you to breathe again. The kind that reminds you that struggling after difficult experiences does not make you weak. It makes you human. You are allowed to be affected by what happened. Even if you hid it well, even if nobody noticed, even if you kept surviving anyway, especially then. Many people treat rest like a reward instead of a basic human need. They tell themselves, "I'll rest after everything is finished. I just need to get through this week. One more task, then I can relax." But the tasks never fully end. There is always another responsibility, another message, another pressure waiting for your attention. So you keep pushing yourself past your limits because somewhere along the way, you started believing that slowing down means falling behind. Even when your body feels tired, your mind keeps saying, "Keep going. Don't be lazy. You should be doing more." And after hearing those thoughts long enough, resting begins to feel uncomfortable. You sit down for a moment and suddenly feel guilty. You take a break, but cannot fully enjoy it because your mind keeps reminding you of everything left undone. So even during moments of rest, you are still carrying pressure. That kind of exhaustion slowly changes people. You begin waking up tired, no matter how much sleep you get. Simple tasks feel heavier than they used to. You lose patience more quickly. You feel emotionally drained by things you once handled easily. And instead of recognizing burnout, many people become angry with themselves for struggling. They think, "Why can't I keep up? What happened to my motivation? Why am I so exhausted all the time?" But human beings are not designed to function endlessly without care. Even machines overheat when pushed too far. And yet people expect themselves to carry stress, emotional pain, responsibility, pressure, and constant expectations without ever slowing down. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And part of becoming healthier is learning that rest is not weakness. It is not failure. It is not laziness. It is not something you must earn through complete exhaustion. Rest is how people recover emotionally. It is how the mind resets. It is how the body asks for care after carrying too much for too long. But many people were taught to feel guilty for resting. Maybe they grew up believing productivity determined their worth. Maybe they learned that being constantly busy meant being responsible. Maybe they only received praise when they were achieving something. So now, even when they desperately need rest, they feel undeserving of it. They only allow themselves to stop once they completely break down. And that is such a painful way to live, because life becomes a cycle of overworking, emotional depletion, and silent burnout. You keep waiting for permission to pause, but your exhaustion is already permission. You do not need to reach complete collapse before caring for yourself. You do not need to prove your suffering before taking a break. Some people are biased to surviving that they no longer recognize when they are overwhelmed. They continue functioning while emotionally drained. They continue helping others while secretly running on empty. They continue carrying responsibilities while quietly hoping for relief. And eventually, even joy becomes difficult to feel because exhaustion leaves so little emotional space for anything else. That is why rest matters. Not just physical rest, mental rest too. Moments where you are not constantly criticizing yourself. Moments where you are not trying to fix every part of your life at once. Moments where you allow yourself to simply exist without pressure. Because constantly living in survival mode changes the nervous system. You become restless even during quiet moments. You struggle to fully relax. Your mind stays alert, as if something always needs your attention. And after enough time, peace itself can begin to feel unfamiliar. But healing often begins with very small moments of softness. Saying no without explaining yourself repeatedly. Going to bed earlier instead of forcing yourself through another exhausting night. Taking a quiet walk without turning it into productivity. Allowing yourself one slow evening without guilt. These moments may seem small, but they matter deeply. Because every time you allow yourself rest without punishment, you send a message to yourself. My worth is not based only on how much I produce. That message can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you spent years believing you had to constantly prove your value through effort. But eventually, something begins changing inside you. You stop viewing yourself as a machine that exists only to perform. You begin recognizing your limits before burnout forces you to. You start understanding that exhaustion is not something to be ashamed of. It is a sign that you have been carrying too much. Jung also said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And sometimes, complete acceptance means accepting that you are tired, not weak, not lazy, not failing, just tired. And tired people deserve rest too. You are allowed to pause before life forces you to. You are allowed to care for yourself before reaching your breaking point. You are allowed to stop treating rest like something that must be earned through suffering, because you are a human being, not a machine built for endless endurance. And maybe one of the kindest things you can do for yourself during hard times is finally stop demanding constant strength from someone who is already exhausted. A lot of people imagine healing as a dramatic moment. They picture waking up one morning feeling completely different, confident, motivated, finally free from all the heaviness they have been carrying. But real healing usually does not happen that way. Most of the time, healing is quiet. It happens in small moments that almost seem unimportant while they are happening. Getting out of bed when your mind feels heavy. Answering one message after isolating yourself for days. Taking care of basic things even when you have no energy. Trying again after another difficult week. These moments may not look impressive from the outside, but they matter deeply. Because when someone has been emotionally exhausted for a long time, even small steps can require enormous effort. The difficult part is that healing often feels slow. You expect progress to move in a straight line, but emotions do not work that way. Some days you feel hopeful. Other days, old sadness suddenly returns. You think you are doing better. Then one small moment pulls you back into emotions you thought you had already moved past. And when that happens, many people become discouraged. They think, "I thought I was healing. Why am I feeling this again? Maybe I haven't changed at all." But healing is not the absence of difficult emotions. Healing is learning how to meet those emotions differently. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Growth often feels uncomfortable because you are slowly becoming aware of parts of yourself you ignored for a long time. Your exhaustion, your loneliness, your emotional wounds, your need for care. And awareness can feel painful before it feels freeing, especially if you spent years distracting yourself from what you truly felt. Sometimes healing means finally noticing how tired you are. Sometimes it means admitting you have been pretending to be okay for too long. Sometimes it means realizing you have spent years abandoning your own emotional needs. Those realizations are not signs of failure. They are part of becoming honest with yourself. But honesty can feel messy. There are days where healing looks like progress. And there are days where healing looks like crying unexpectedly in the middle of an ordinary moment because your emotions finally caught up with you. There are days where you feel strong. Then days where even simple tasks feel overwhelming again. That does not mean you are going backward. It means healing is human. Many people secretly believe they should heal quickly. They become frustrated with themselves for still struggling after months or years. But emotional pain does not disappear on command, especially when it has been carried silently for a long time. You cannot rush yourself into peace by becoming impatient with your pain. In fact, harshness often slows healing down even more. Because when every difficult emotion is met with criticism, your mind never feels safe enough to fully recover. That is why self-kindness matters so much during healing. Not because kindness magically removes pain, but because pain becomes heavier when combined with self-hatred. You deserve patience while you heal, even if your progress feels slow, even if you still have difficult days, even if part of you feels frustrated by how long everything is taking. Healing is not a competition. There is no perfect timeline for becoming emotionally okay again. Some wounds take longer because they affected deeper parts of you. Some exhaustion lasts because you ignored your needs for years. Some sadness stays because your mind and body are still trying to recover from carrying too much for too long. And recovery is rarely graceful. Jung also said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming yourself often requires letting go of survival habits that once protected you, constantly pretending you are fine, overworking to avoid your emotions, staying emotionally distant because vulnerability feels unsafe." Healing asks you to slowly release those patterns, and that process can feel unfamiliar, sometimes lonely, sometimes exhausting, sometimes confusing. Because growth rarely feels polished while it is happening. Most of the time, it feels ordinary. It looks like choosing to care for yourself on days when you barely have motivation. It looks like setting small boundaries instead of saying yes to everything. It looks like allowing yourself to rest without endless guilt. It looks like learning to speak to yourself with a little more softness. These moments may seem small, but over time, they change you, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly at first, until one day you notice something important. The pain no longer controls every part of your life the way it once did. You still have difficult moments, but you no longer abandon yourself inside them. And that is real healing. Not perfection, not becoming emotionally unaffected, not turning into someone who never struggles again. Real healing is learning how to stay connected to yourself even during hard seasons. It is learning that your difficult emotions do not make you broken. It is understanding that progress can exist even when life still feels messy. And maybe the reason healing rarely looks impressive while it's happening is because some of the most important changes in life happen quietly. One gentle decision at a time. one honest moment at a time, one small act of self-kindness at a time. Some of the hardest battles people fight are the ones nobody else can see. The conversations happening quietly inside your head, the constant overthinking, the endless replaying of mistakes, awkward moments, regrets, and fears. Sometimes your mind becomes so loud that even silence feels exhausting. You try to relax, but your thoughts keep pulling you backward. You remember something embarrassing from years ago. You start worrying about things that have not even happened yet. You question your worth over the smallest situations. And after a while, your own mind begins to feel like a place where you are constantly defending yourself. Many people believe they must control every thought in order to feel okay. So they fight with themselves all day long. They argue with every fear, panic over every negative emotion, try to force themselves to think positively, even when they are emotionally overwhelmed. But the harder you fight certain thoughts, the more trapped inside them you sometimes become. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And many people experience exactly that. The more they fear their difficult thoughts, the more power those thoughts seem to gain. The more they try to suppress sadness, anxiety, or insecurity, the heavier everything feels internally. But maybe healing is not about winning every battle inside your mind. Maybe it is about learning that not every thought deserves complete belief, because thoughts are not always facts. Sometimes thoughts come from exhaustion, sometimes from fear, sometimes from old emotional wounds that become louder during difficult seasons. A tired mind can make life look hopeless. An anxious mind can make small problems feel enormous. A hurt mind can convince you that you are unlovable, failing, or falling behind. But emotions can distort perspective, and when people are struggling emotionally, they often forget that. They assume every fearful thought must be true simply because it feels intense. So one difficult day suddenly becomes, "My life is falling apart." One mistake becomes, "I ruin everything." One moment of rejection becomes, "Nobody truly cares about me." Your mind can become incredibly convincing when you are overwhelmed, and that is why self-kindness matters during hard times. Not because it instantly removes negative thoughts, but because it changes the way you respond to them. Instead of attacking yourself for struggling, you begin responding with gentleness. Instead of saying, "What is wrong with me?" you begin saying, "I'm having a hard moment right now." That small shift matters more than people realize, because many people are already emotionally exhausted before the day even begins. Then, their inner voice makes everything heavier. Every fear becomes proof. Every difficult emotion becomes failure. Every moment of uncertainty becomes something to panic over. Living this way is exhausting, especially when you believe you must mentally fix yourself every second. But human beings are not meant to feel calm, confident, and emotionally steady all the time. There will be moments of insecurity, moments of sadness, moments where your thoughts become messy and overwhelming. That does not make you broken. It makes you human. Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Part of knowing yourself is recognizing that difficult thoughts exist without immediately letting them define your identity. You can feel fear without becoming fear. You can experience sadness without believing your entire life is hopeless. You can struggle mentally without concluding that you are failing as a person. That understanding creates emotional space. And emotional space is important because people often suffer not only from painful thoughts, but from the panic they feel about having those thoughts at all. They become afraid of their own minds. But healing sometimes begins when you stop treating every uncomfortable thought like an emergency. When you stop trying to win every internal argument. Some thoughts do not need to be defeated. Some simply need to pass through without becoming your entire reality. That takes practice, especially if you have spent years overanalyzing everything. You may still have nights where your mind races, still have moments where fear feels louder than logic, still find yourself replaying old conversations and imagined worst-case scenarios. But slowly, you begin noticing something. You no longer believe every thought immediately. You pause before judging yourself. You breathe before spiraling into panic. You stop assuming every emotional reaction defines who you are. And in those moments, your mind becomes a little less frightening. Not perfectly peaceful, not completely quiet, but softer, more understanding, more patient. Because real healing is not becoming someone who never struggles mentally again. Real healing is learning how to stay compassionate toward yourself while you do. You do not need to win every battle inside your mind to deserve peace. You do not need to become emotionally perfect to deserve rest. You do not need to silence every fear before you are worthy of kindness. Some days, your thoughts will feel heavy, but even then, you deserve gentleness. Even then, you deserve patience. And maybe one of the most powerful things you can learn during hard times is this: you are not your worst thought. You are not every fear your mind creates. And you do not have to spend your entire life fighting yourself just to feel worthy of love, peace, or rest. Some people become so used to being the strong one that they forget they are allowed to struggle too. They become the person everyone depends on, the person who listens, the person who stays calm during difficult situations, the person who keeps showing up no matter how exhausted they feel inside. And after a while, people stop asking if they are okay because they assume they always will be. But strength can become lonely when you never feel safe enough to put your own burdens down. So you keep carrying everything quietly. You smile during conversations, even when your mind feels heavy. You help other people while secretly feeling emotionally drained yourself. You continue handling responsibilities while hoping nobody notices how tired you really are. And eventually, exhaustion becomes hidden behind functionality. You still go to work, still reply to people, still do what needs to be done. But inside, You feel overwhelmed in ways you can barely explain. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." And many people understand this feeling deeply, because sometimes the hardest part is not being physically alone. It is feeling emotionally unseen. You want someone to notice your exhaustion without needing a long explanation. You want to feel supported without feeling guilty for needing support at all. But instead, you keep saying, "I'm fine. I'll handle it. Don't worry about me." Not because you truly feel okay, but because you are afraid of becoming a burden. So you carry stress privately, pain privately, fear privately. And over time, emotional isolation begins to feel normal. You stop reaching out because you think everyone else already has enough problems. You minimize your own struggles because they do not seem serious enough. You convince yourself you should be able to manage everything alone. But human beings were never designed to emotionally survive without support. No one can carry endless pressure, responsibility, sadness, and exhaustion alone forever, without eventually feeling overwhelmed. Yet many people try. They become emotionally independent to the point where asking for help feels uncomfortable. Even receiving care can feel unfamiliar. When someone asks how they are doing, they automatically say, "I'm okay," before even checking in with themselves honestly. And sometimes, people become so disconnected from their own emotional needs that they no longer recognize how lonely they actually feel. Not because nobody cares about them, but because they stopped allowing themselves to be cared for. There is a difference. Many strong people secretly believe their value comes from being useful, from helping others, from being dependable, from solving problems quietly without needing much in return. So when they finally need support themselves, shame appears immediately. They think, "I should be able to handle this. I don't want to bother anyone. Other people have bigger problems." But pain does not disappear simply because you minimize it. Exhaustion does not become lighter just because you carry it silently. In fact, silence often makes suffering heavier, because now you are not only carrying pain, you are carrying it alone. Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another," and emotional pain works the same way. What overwhelms one person may not overwhelm another. What deeply affects you may seem small to someone else. But your feelings do not become invalid because they are difficult to explain. You are allowed to need support. You are allowed to feel emotionally tired. You are allowed to admit that carrying everything alone has become too heavy. That admission is not weakness. It is honesty. And honesty is often where healing begins. Sometimes, being kinder to yourself means finally recognizing that you cannot continue surviving only through endurance. You need connection, too. Not perfect people, not people who always say the right thing. Just moments where you no longer feel completely alone inside your struggles. Because even one honest conversation can soften the weight you have been carrying for years. One moment of feeling understood can remind you that you are human, not a machine built only to give. And maybe that is what many exhausted people need most. Not advice, not pressure to stay positive, not reminders to be strong. Maybe they simply need permission to stop pretending they are okay all the time. There is so much pressure in the world to appear emotionally composed, to look like you are handling everything gracefully, to keep functioning no matter how overwhelmed you feel. But constantly hiding your pain creates distance between you and yourself. You begin performing strength instead of actually feeling supported. And eventually, that performance becomes exhausting. The truth is, even the strongest people need comfort sometimes. Even the dependable people need someone to lean on. Even the calm people have moments where they quietly break down internally. And there is nothing shameful about that. You do not lose your strength because you need support. You do not become weak because you are emotionally affected by life. You become human. Healing becomes much harder when you believe you must carry every burden in silence, because isolation often convinces people that they are alone in their struggles. But so many people are quietly carrying invisible exhaustion. So many people are pretending to be okay while internally feeling overwhelmed. And maybe part of healing is finally allowing yourself to be seen honestly, not only when you are doing well, not only when you are emotionally composed, but also during the moments where life feels heavy. You were never meant to carry everything alone. Not the pressure, not the sadness, not the fear, not the exhaustion. And maybe one of the kindest things you can do for yourself during hard times is finally putting some of that weight down, instead of convincing yourself you must hold it forever. There are people who carry guilt so quietly that nobody around them realizes how heavy it has become. They replay old mistakes in their minds late at night. They revisit conversations they wish had gone differently. They think about choices they regret and silently punish themselves over and over again. Even years later, the shame still follows them. And sometimes the hardest part is not what happened. It is the way they continue speaking to themselves because of it. They call themselves foolish, weak, a failure. They struggle to move forward because part of them believes they no longer deserve peace after certain mistakes. So instead of learning from the past, they become trapped inside it. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And making the darkness conscious sometimes means honestly looking at the parts of your life that still hurt you. The choices you regret. The moments you lost yourself. The times you acted from fear, exhaustion, anger, or emotional confusion. But awareness should lead to understanding, not lifelong self-punishment. Many people forget that the version of themselves who made those mistakes was often struggling in ways nobody else fully saw. Maybe they were emotionally overwhelmed. Maybe they were trying to survive. Maybe they lacked the wisdom they have now. But instead of offering themselves compassion, they continue expecting perfection from a past version of themselves who was already hurting. And that creates a painful cycle. You grow. You change. You become more self-aware. Yet you still keep your old mistakes tied to your identity, as if they permanently define who you are. So, even when life moves forward, part of you stays emotionally stuck. You begin feeling like you must carry shame forever to prove that you truly regret what happened. But shame and growth are not the same thing. In fact, endless shame often prevents growth because it keeps people trapped in self-hatred instead of self-understanding. There is a difference between taking responsibility and emotionally destroying yourself. Responsible people reflect. They learn. They try to do better. But self-punishment goes further than reflection. It whispers, "You will never change. You will always be this version of yourself. You do not deserve peace anymore." And after hearing those thoughts long enough, many people begin believing them. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That quote matters deeply because human beings are not frozen in one moment forever. People evolve. People mature. People become more aware over time. And often, the pain you feel about your past is proof that you are no longer the same person who made those choices. Emotionally healthy people do not enjoy hurting others or hurting themselves. The regret itself often reveals growth. But many people struggle to accept that. They think forgiving themselves means pretending the past did not matter. It does not. Forgiveness is not denial. It is simply refusing to spend the rest of your life emotionally attacking yourself for being imperfect and human. Because nobody moves through life without making mistakes. Nobody handles every season perfectly. Nobody always reacts wisely while overwhelmed, exhausted, afraid, or emotionally lost. Human beings learn through experience, through pain, through reflection. And sometimes people only become softer after realizing how deeply their choices affected themselves and others. That realization can hurt. But pain can either become wisdom or permanent self-hatred. The choice matters. There are people who spend years carrying emotional guilt for things they have already grown beyond. They continue introducing themselves to life through old shame. Even after changing. Even after becoming kinder. Even after trying to rebuild themselves. And eventually, they stop seeing who they are now because they are too focused on who they once were. That is such a painful way to live, especially because healing requires room for growth. You cannot become healthier while constantly telling yourself you are beyond redemption. You cannot build peace while emotionally reopening old wounds every day. At some point, compassion becomes necessary. Not excuses, not avoidance. Compassion. The kind that says, "Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I wish I had handled some things differently. But I also understand that I was struggling learning, and trying to survive life with the awareness I had at the time. That perspective changes something inside you, because suddenly you stop viewing yourself only through your worst moments. You begin seeing your full humanity. The fear you carried, the pain you hid, the emotional exhaustion beneath certain choices. And instead of hating yourself endlessly, you begin understanding yourself more honestly. Jung also wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Part of knowing yourself is accepting that you are capable of mistakes without believing you are permanently broken because of them. You are allowed to outgrow old versions of yourself. You are allowed to become wiser. You are allowed to heal from the shame you have carried for years. Because constantly punishing yourself will not change the past. It will only steal your ability to fully live in the present. And maybe one of the hardest but most important forms of healing is finally saying, "I have suffered enough from this. I have learned. I have changed. And I deserve the chance to move forward too." Forgiving yourself does not erase your past. It simply means you stop making pain your permanent identity. And sometimes that is the moment real healing finally begins. One of the saddest things people do during hard times is begin questioning their value simply because they are struggling. When life becomes heavy, many people slowly start believing they are less than, because they are no longer functioning the way they normally do. They become more tired, more emotional, less productive, less social. And instead of responding to themselves with compassion, they respond with disappointment. They think, "I should be doing more. I used to handle life better. Why can't I be the person I was before?" So without realizing it, they begin measuring their worth through productivity, energy, and emotional performance. If they are achieving, they feel valuable. If they are struggling, they feel like a burden. But difficult seasons change people temporarily. Stress affects the body. Emotional pain affects concentration. Exhaustion changes motivation. Long periods of pressure slowly drain emotional energy. That is not failure. That is being human. Carl Jung once said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." Every person experiences seasons where life feels heavier than expected. Moments where they lose confidence. Moments where they feel emotionally exhausted. Moments where they quietly wonder if they are falling behind everyone else. And during those moments, self-worth often becomes fragile. You compare yourself to people who seem happier, more successful, more emotionally stable. You look at your own life and only notice what is missing. Suddenly, your difficult season starts feeling like proof that you are inadequate. But struggling does not erase your value. You are still worthy on the days where your mind feels overwhelmed. Still worthy on the days where getting through basic tasks takes all your energy. Still worthy when you are emotionally exhausted and unsure of yourself. Your worth does not disappear because you are having a hard time. Yet many people were taught the opposite. Some learned that love and approval only came when they were performing well, when they were useful, when they were calm, productive, successful, or emotionally easy to be around. So now, whenever they struggle, shame appears immediately. They begin apologizing for their emotions, hiding their exhaustion, pretending they are okay because they fear becoming too much for other people. And slowly, they stop treating themselves like a person deserving care. Instead, they treat themselves like a problem that needs to be fixed as quickly as possible. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming yourself also means learning that your humanity does not disappear during painful seasons. You are not only valuable when you are strong, not only lovable when you are emotionally composed, not only worthy when you are productive and confident. You are worthy even when life feels messy. That can be difficult to believe during hard times because pain changes perspective. Exhaustion makes people feel inadequate. Loneliness makes people feel invisible. Failure makes people feel unimportant. And when these emotions stay long enough, they begin shaping the way you see yourself. You stop noticing your effort. You stop recognizing how much you are carrying. You only focus on what you cannot currently give. But surviving difficult seasons already requires enormous strength. Even if nobody sees it, waking up while emotionally drained takes strength. Continuing life while carrying invisible pain takes strength. Trying again after disappointment takes strength. Many people underestimate themselves because they compare their current season to the version of themselves that existed before the exhaustion, heartbreak, pressure, or emotional burnout began. But you cannot expect yourself to carry pain and still function exactly the same way. You are affected by what you go through, and that does not make you weak. It makes you real. There are moments where life asks more from people than they feel capable of giving. During those moments, self-kindness becomes essential. Not because kindness magically solves pain, but because pain becomes unbearable when combined with self-rejection. You deserve compassion during your worst seasons too, not only after you heal, not only after you become more productive again, not only after you get your life together. Now, as you are, even if you still feel uncertain, even if you are emotionally tired, even if your progress feels slow, because your value as a person is not based on how perfectly you survive difficult seasons. And maybe that is something many people desperately need to hear. You do not lose your worth because you became overwhelmed. You do not become less important because you are struggling emotionally. You do not become unlovable because life affected you deeply. Hard seasons can make people forget who they are. They become so focused on surviving that they stop seeing their own humanity clearly. But your exhaustion is not your identity. Your sadness is not your identity. Your difficult season is not your entire story. It is a chapter, a painful chapter sometimes, but still only a chapter. And chapters change. Jung also wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. That does not mean ignoring pain. It means remembering that difficult moments do not permanently define your value. You are still becoming, still growing, still deserving of care. Even now, especially now. And maybe one of the most healing things you can remember during hard times is this: your worth does not disappear on the days you struggle to hold yourself together. Those are often the days you need kindness the most. There comes a point where exhaustion is no longer just physical. It settles deeper than that. You feel it in your thoughts, in your emotions, in the way simple things suddenly feel heavy. You wake up already tired, not because you did not sleep enough, but because your mind has been carrying too much for too long. Too many responsibilities, too many worries, too many emotions you never fully allowed yourself to feel. And somewhere along the way, you became so focused on surviving that you forgot you were allowed to slow down. You kept pushing yourself because you thought you had to. You told yourself, just keep going. Other people depend on you. You can rest later. So you continued carrying everything quietly. The pressure, the sadness, the disappointment, the loneliness you rarely talk about. And after a while, carrying pain became so normal that you stopped noticing how exhausted you truly were. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And sometimes, complete acceptance means finally admitting, I am tired. I cannot keep pretending I'm unaffected. I have been carrying more than I can handle alone. That honesty can feel emotional because many people spend years trying to appear stronger than they really feel. They become experts at hiding their pain. They smile while overwhelmed. They comfort others while silently struggling themselves. They continue functioning while emotionally running on empty. And eventually, they begin believing their own needs no longer matter. So they ignore the signs, the constant exhaustion, the emotional numbness, the quiet sadness that follows them even during calm moments. Instead of listening to themselves, they criticize themselves for struggling. They think, why can't I handle life better? What's wrong with me? Why am I so tired all the time? But maybe nothing is wrong with you. Maybe you have simply been carrying too much without enough care, rest, or support. Human beings are not meant to live in permanent survival mode. Eventually, the mind and body begin asking for attention. Sometimes through burnout, sometimes through anxiety, sometimes through emotional shutdown, where you no longer feel fully connected to yourself or the people around you. And when that happens, many people become even harsher with themselves instead of softer. They try to force themselves to push through. But endless endurance is not healing. Ignoring your exhaustion does not make you stronger. It only teaches you to abandon yourself more deeply. Jung once said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And maybe part of becoming healthier is deciding that your suffering no longer has to be the price of your worth. Because many people unknowingly believe they must constantly struggle to deserve rest. They feel guilty slowing down, guilty needing support, guilty for not being emotionally strong all the time. So they continue carrying impossible expectations until life finally forces them to stop. But you do not need to completely break before caring for yourself. You do not need to wait until your exhaustion becomes unbearable before treating yourself with compassion. You are allowed to acknowledge that this season has been difficult. You are allowed to admit that you are emotionally tired. That does not make you weak. It makes you honest. And honesty matters because healing begins the moment you stop pretending everything is fine when it clearly is not. There are people who spent years surviving through emotional suppression. They distracted themselves constantly, stayed busy constantly, avoided stillness because silence forced them to feel everything they had been carrying. But eventually, those emotions catch up. The sadness, the grief, the pressure, the loneliness. Not because you are failing, but because your mind and body can only hold so much without rest. And maybe that is why kindness toward yourself matters so much during hard times. Not surface-level positivity. Not pretending everything will instantly improve. Real kindness. The kind that allows you to pause without guilt. The kind that stops attacking you for being overwhelmed. The kind that understands you are human, not a machine built for endless pressure. Sometimes kindness looks very small. Letting yourself rest earlier instead of forcing another exhausting night. Speaking to yourself gently after a difficult day. Allowing yourself to say, "I can't handle everything right now." These moments matter because they interrupt the cycle of self-abandonment. For so long, maybe you believed your role was to keep carrying everything, no matter how heavy it became. But eventually, every person reaches a limit. And reaching that limit does not mean you failed. It means you are human. Jung also wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Part of knowing yourself is recognizing when your inner world has become too heavy to continue ignoring. Recognizing when you need care instead of criticism. Rest instead of pressure. Compassion instead of shame. Because no matter how strong you are, constantly carrying emotional pain alone changes you. It drains joy from ordinary moments. It makes peace feel unfamiliar. It turns life into something you survive instead of something you experience. And you deserve more than endless survival. You deserve moments where your nervous system can finally soften. Moments where you no longer feel responsible for holding everything together perfectly. Moments where you remember that your value is not measured by how much pain you can tolerate silently. You have spent enough time being hard on yourself. Enough time expecting impossible strength from an exhausted version of you. Enough time believing you had to earn rest through suffering. You've carried enough. Enough pressure. Enough emotional weight. Enough silent battles nobody else fully saw. And maybe healing begins the moment you finally stop asking yourself to carry all of it alone. Maybe healing begins when you finally give yourself permission to breathe, to pause, to rest, to be human, without guilt, without shame, without feeling like you must prove your worth through exhaustion anymore.